portrait of a lonely human being who doesn't know anything about himself, who has very little identity. His identity comes from what people say about him, what people write about him, and the people who take his picture, but he doesn't have any familiarity with what...
For decades, Steven Spielberg has been hailed as the king of Hollywood, a director whose films have defined generations. From Jaws to Jurassic Park, from E.T. to Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg has created timeless classics that have shaped the industry itself. His reputation as a visionary is undisputed. But behind the blockbuster success stories lies a truth that rarely makes it to the red carpet. Because for every actor who gushes about working with Spielberg, there are others who walked away with very different feelings. While Spielberg is admired for his creativity and genius, not everyone has found his directing style easy to handle. Some clashed with his meticulous vision, others resented the long hours and high expectations, and a few outright admitted they hated the experience. Over the years, whispers from the set have revealed tensions, arguments, and behind-the-scenes, drama that fans rarely hear about. And when the biggest director in Hollywood is involved, those stories become even juicier. In this video, we dive deep into the hidden history of Spielberg's working relationships. We'll uncover 6 actors who, for one reason or another, walked away from his movies with regret, resentment, or even hatred. Their stories reveal a side of Spielberg that is rarely shown to the public, and they might just change the way you see your favorite films forever. When Steven Spielberg cast Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws, 1975, it was a career-defining opportunity for the young actor. Spielberg, only 27 at the time, was still proving himself as a director, while Dreyfuss was eager to break out of supporting roles and establish himself as a leading man. Together, they were about to make one of the most iconic thrillers in cinema history. But behind the scenes, the production of Jaws was anything but smooth, and Spielberg and Dreyfuss's working relationship quickly became one of the stormiest aspects of the shoot. Filming Jaws was famously chaotic. The mechanical shark often malfunctioned, the schedule spiraled out of control, and Spielberg felt the pressure of a studio watching closely as costs soared. In this tense environment, Dreyfuss's on-set behavior clashed with Spielberg's perfectionism. Dreyfuss, known for his sharp wit and occasional arrogance, didn't always respond well to Spielberg's obsessive attention to detail. The young actor bristled under constant direction, feeling as though Spielberg didn't trust his instincts as a performer. The tension between them sometimes boiled over in front of cast and crew. Dreyfuss himself later admitted he was insecure at the time, often second-guessing his own choices and pushing back against Spielberg's notes. Spielberg, meanwhile, grew frustrated with what he saw as Dreyfuss's unpredictable temperament. Their arguments were loud enough to become legendary, and the crew often found themselves caught in the middle. One infamous story involved Spielberg asking Dreyfuss to climb a 75-foot mast for a stunt. Dreyfuss refused, snapping back that he wasn't a stuntman and didn't want to risk his life for a shot. Spielberg, exasperated, accused him of being unprofessional. Dreyfuss later recalled storming off set, convinced Spielberg was impossible to work with. At one point, he even admitted to deliberately trying to provoke Spielberg, throwing tantrums and needling him when he thought the director was being unreasonable. Yet despite the friction, something remarkable happened. Their creative, tension-fueled unforgettable performances. Dreyfuss's portrayal of oceanographer Matt Hooper remains one of his most beloved roles, and Spielberg's vision turned Jaws into the first modern summer blockbuster. Still, when the cameras stopped rolling, the relationship between actor and director was strained. Dreyfuss confessed in later years that he was a pain in the neck on set, and that Spielberg often bore the brunt of his youthful insecurities. For years after Jaws, the tension lingered. Spielberg and Dreyfuss avoided working together, and interviews from the time revealed subtle digs each would make about the other's personality. Spielberg once quipped that working with Dreyfuss was like babysitting a very talented but very difficult child, while Dreyfuss described Spielberg as a control freak who didn't know how to let go. Their feud reached a strange turning point when Spielberg invited Dreyfuss to star in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. Many assumed the Jaws battle scars would prevent them from collaborating again, but Spielberg, recognizing Dreyfuss's undeniable talent, gave him another chance, and this time the partnership worked more smoothly. Both men had matured since Jaws, and though the relationship wasn't perfect, they produced another classic together. Still, the stories from the Jaws set became Hollywood legend. Crew members often recalled how the constant arguments between Spielberg and Dreyfuss made an already nightmarish shoot even more exhausting. While both men eventually laughed about their clashes in later interviews, the truth remains. During the making of Jaws, Richard Dreyfuss was one of the actors who absolutely hated working with Steven Spielberg, and Spielberg wasn't exactly fond of him either. Looking back, Dreyfuss admitted that much of the tension came from his own insecurities. In his words, "I was young, I was cocky, and I was scared. Steven was brilliant, but I didn't know how to handle him." Spielberg, for his part, acknowledged that Jaws was a trial by fire for everyone involved, himself included. While time softened the bitterness between them, the feud between Spielberg and Dreyfuss remains one of the most talked about behind-the-scenes dramas in Hollywood history. When Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull hit theaters in 2008, audiences were excited to see Harrison Ford return as the iconic adventurer, this time joined by a younger co-star meant to carry the franchise into a new era. That co-star was Shia LaBeouf, cast as Mutt Williams, Indy's rebellious son. For Spielberg, who directed the film, LaBeouf represented the kind of youthful energy and box office draw that could refresh the Indiana Jones legacy. But what happened? After the cameras stopped rolling, would create one of the most public and embarrassing rifts in Spielberg's career. On set, Spielberg and LaBeouf initially seemed to get along. Spielberg admired Shia's energy and naturalism, while LaBeouf often described Spielberg as a childhood idol. The actor grew up watching films like E.T., Jurassic Park, and Saving Private Ryan, and he openly admitted that working with Spielberg was like playing in the big leagues. But after the film's release, things took a dramatic turn. Crystal Skull was a commercial success, but a critical disappointment. Many fans and reviewers felt it paled in comparison to the earlier Indiana Jones adventures, criticizing its over-reliance on CGI and far-fetched storylines. For LaBeouf, who was just 22 at the time, the backlash was overwhelming. Instead of standing by the film, he publicly attacked it, and by extension, Spielberg himself. In multiple interviews, LaBeouf didn't hold back. He admitted to feeling embarrassed by his performance, but he also directly criticized the film's direction and tone. Speaking to Los Angeles Times, LaBeouf confessed, "I feel like I dropped the ball on the legacy that people loved and cherished. You can blame a lot of things on the writer and the director, but the actor's job is to bring it to life, and I couldn't do it." But it wasn't just self-criticism. LaBeouf went further, suggesting that Spielberg had failed the fans. In another interview, he said bluntly, "I think the audience is pretty intelligent. I think they know when you've made expletive, and I think if you don't admit it, you're complicit in the expletive." These comments shocked Hollywood. Few actors would ever dare to openly attack a project tied to Spielberg, let alone suggest that the legendary director had let audiences down. Spielberg, known for his professionalism, was deeply disappointed. While he never engaged in a public war of words, sources close to the production revealed that Spielberg felt betrayed. For decades, he had cultivated a reputation as a filmmaker who supported his actors and created a sense of loyalty on set. To see LaBeouf turn around and tear down the film, and by extension his leadership, was both hurtful and unprofessional. The fallout was immediate. Spielberg and LaBeouf never worked together again, despite early rumors that Mutt Williams would take on a larger role in future Indiana Jones installments. When Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was announced years later, LaBeouf's character was completely written out of the story. It was a clear signal that the relationship between Spielberg's creative world and LaBeouf was beyond repair. For LaBeouf, the incident became one of several controversies that defined his career. Known for his volatile personality and tendency to lash out, his criticism of Spielberg was often cited as proof that he lacked the discipline and respect needed to thrive in Hollywood's upper echelon. Many in the industry saw it as career self-sabotage, the kind of reckless honesty that burns bridges with the most powerful figures in entertainment. Over time, LaBeouf expressed some regret, acknowledging that his comments may have been too harsh. In later interviews, he admitted that his immaturity and frustration got the best of him. But by then, the damage was already done. Spielberg had moved on, and the Indiana Jones franchise had closed its doors on Shia LaBeouf for good. The LaBeouf-Spielberg fallout stands as one of the clearest examples of how admiration can turn sour. For a young actor, working with Spielberg was supposed to be a dream come true. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of biting the hand that feeds you. For Spielberg, it was proof that not every collaboration, no matter how promising, ends with loyalty or respect. In 1991, Steven Spielberg released Hook, a live-action reimagining of the Peter Pan story, starring Robin Williams as a grown-up Peter, Dustin Hoffman as Captain, Hook and Julia Roberts as Tinkerbell. On paper, the casting looked magical. Roberts, fresh off her breakout in Pretty Woman, was one of Hollywood's brightest rising stars. Spielberg was at the height of his creative power, with E.T., Indiana Jones, and Jurassic Park cementing his legacy. Yet behind the fantasy, the production of Hook was anything but enchanted, especially when it came to Spielberg's relationship with Julia Roberts. From the start, Spielberg had high hopes for Roberts. Her luminous screen presence and playful charm made her seem like a perfect fit for Tinkerbell. But once filming began, rumors of conflict quickly began to circulate. Roberts was dealing with intense media scrutiny following her sudden breakup with actor Kiefer Sutherland, and tabloids were relentless in covering her personal life. At the same time, she was struggling with the demands of the role itself. Tinkerbell, unlike the other characters in Hook, required Roberts to film much of her role alone against green screens, with her lines and movements added later into special effects heavy scenes. For an actress used to bouncing off other performers, it was a frustrating and isolating experience. Crew members reported that Roberts often appeared unhappy on set, and her mood reportedly affected the overall atmosphere of filming. The tension reached a point where Spielberg himself began to grow frustrated. While he rarely criticized actors publicly, he later acknowledged in interviews that working with Roberts on Hook had been difficult. He once commented, "It was an unfortunate time for us to work together." That simple phrase, though measured, spoke volumes. Spielberg was known for choosing his words carefully, and this remark hinted at just how strained their working relationship had become. For Roberts, the media wasn't kind either. She was given the unflattering nickname Tinkerhell by some in Hollywood gossip circles, painting her as a diva whose behavior disrupted the production. Insiders suggested she clashed with Spielberg's direction, struggled with the physical limitations of her role, and at times even considered walking away from the film entirely. Despite these troubles, Spielberg maintained professionalism, pushing forward with the project and ensuring that Roberts' performance still shined on screen. But the damage to their personal and professional rapport was undeniable. Roberts later admitted that she was going through one of the toughest periods of her life during the making of Hook, which explains much of the tension that arose. The fallout wasn't just gossip, it had long-term consequences. Spielberg and Roberts never collaborated again after Hook. For a director who frequently worked with actors across multiple projects, think of Tom Hanks, Richard Dreyfuss, or Harrison Ford, this silence was telling. Roberts continued to rise in Hollywood, becoming one of the most bankable stars of the 1990s and 2000s, but her absence from Spielberg's future projects was noticeable. In retrospect, both sides have handled the tension with grace. Roberts, in later interviews, downplayed the conflict and even praised Spielberg, saying she still admired his work deeply. Spielberg, too, never engaged in personal attacks, instead chalking it up to bad timing and unfortunate circumstances. But Hollywood insiders remember the making of Hook as a cautionary tale of how even the most promising collaborations can sour under pressure. Interestingly, the film itself went on to have a mixed reception. Hook received lukewarm reviews upon release, though it found a devoted fan base in later years. For many viewers, Roberts' performance as Tinkerbell remains iconic, a reminder of the magic she was able to bring to the screen despite the challenges behind the scenes. Still, the strained relationship between Spielberg and Roberts is often cited when people talk about Spielberg's rare but notable clashes with actors. It wasn't a public feud full of insults or bitterness. It was more a quiet acknowledgement that not every pairing is destined to work. In an industry built on relationships, this particular chapter stands as one of Spielberg's more famous behind-the-scenes disappointments. When you think of Steven Spielberg's early masterpieces, Richard, Dreyfuss's face comes instantly to mind. He starred in two of Spielberg's defining films, Jaws in 1975 and Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. Their collaboration was the stuff of Hollywood legend, a young, hungry director working alongside an equally ambitious actor who seemed destined to become one of the era's greats. Yet, as history would show, even the strongest partnerships can unravel. The relationship between Spielberg and Dreyfuss shifted from creative brilliance to personal tension, ultimately leaving scars that neither could fully ignore. The story begins on the set of Jaws. Spielberg, then just 27 years old, was under massive pressure to deliver Universal Pictures a hit. The mechanical shark constantly malfunctioned, production went over schedule, and executives grew nervous about the ballooning costs. Amid this chaos, Richard Dreyfuss, cast as marine biologist Matt Hooper, often became both a source of humor and frustration. Spielberg later admitted that Dreyfuss had a cocky streak on set, one that sometimes rubbed his co-stars and even the director the wrong way. Still, the chemistry worked. Dreyfuss's performance gave Jaws much of its human charm, balancing Roy Scheider's steady sheriff and Robert Shaw's grizzled shark hunter. The film became a box office phenomenon, cementing Spielberg as Hollywood's hottest new director and making Dreyfuss a household name. It seemed like the perfect match of director and actor, but just 2 years later, during the filming of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the cracks began to show. Spielberg cast Dreyfuss as Roy Neary, an ordinary man who experiences extraordinary visions after encountering UFOs. It was a demanding role, requiring Dreyfuss to oscillate between wonder, obsession, and near madness. On screen, he delivered brilliantly. Off-screen, however, Spielberg found Dreyfuss increasingly difficult to manage. Accounts from crew members suggest that Dreyfuss questioned Spielberg's direction frequently, sometimes pushing back on the younger filmmaker's choices. Spielberg, who was still in his 20s but already commanding blockbuster productions, reportedly felt undermined. At the same time, Dreyfuss's growing fame and his ego seemed to fuel the tension. He had just won an Academy Award for The Goodbye Girl in 1978, becoming the youngest man ever to win Best Actor at the time. This newfound status only made the dynamic with Spielberg more complicated. The turning point came not during production, but in the years that followed. While promoting Close Encounters, Dreyfuss was candid in his interviews, sometimes too candid. He admitted to clashing with Spielberg and occasionally criticized the director's working style. For Spielberg, who valued loyalty, this was a red flag. Though he never publicly lashed out, insiders say he began to see Dreyfuss as a liability rather than a trusted collaborator. Unlike Shia LaBeouf's public betrayal decades later, the Spielberg-Dreyfuss rift wasn't about one harsh quote or a single incident. It was the slow erosion of trust between two men whose creative visions no longer aligned. Spielberg gravitated toward actors who respected his authority and trusted his instincts. Dreyfuss, on the other hand, saw himself as a creative equal and wasn't afraid to challenge the director. That dynamic, while sometimes fruitful on set, eventually made their partnership unsustainable. The result? After Close Encounters, Spielberg and Dreyfuss never worked together again. For audiences, this was a noticeable absence. Both men continued to thrive. Spielberg went on to dominate the industry with E.T., Jurassic Park, and Schindler's List, while Dreyfuss carved out a steady career in film and television. Yet their brief but turbulent partnership remained a fascinating what-if in Hollywood history. Years later, both men reflected on their time together with mixed emotions. Dreyfuss admitted in interviews that he could be arrogant and difficult during his younger years. Spielberg, while never directly attacking Dreyfuss, kept his distance. It's telling that in Spielberg's long list of recurring collaborators, Tom Hanks, Harrison Ford, Richard Dreyfuss's name is conspicuously absent after the 1970s. The Spielberg-Dreyfuss story serves as a reminder that Hollywood relationships are fragile. Talent alone doesn't guarantee longevity. For Spielberg, working with actors who respected his vision was non-negotiable. For Dreyfuss, maintaining his independence mattered more than appeasing a director, even one as powerful as Spielberg. The result was a partnership that burned brightly but briefly, leaving behind two unforgettable films, and a fractured friendship that never quite healed.